Уважаемый Владимир Владимирович, дорогие гости, позвольте перед тем, как мы приступим к беседе, поблагодарить вас, Владимир Владимирович, за то, что вы все эти годы помогаете сохранять замечательную традицию. Традиция заключается в том, что информационное агентство России ТАСС собирает своих зарубежных коллег для встречи с вами.
Foreign colleagues to meet with you, and I don't know the way you find every time you find time in your busy schedule, and you find time to have you been offered a tour around this center? Yes, we have, and possibly after the conversation we'll go up to the roof. Don't agree to that. Illusion? Is it dangerous? No. It's hard to get out of the cleaning grip of Mr. Miller. It's hard to get out of it because he talked about detail of every part of this building. He's in love with this building and it's hard to get out. But did you like the building? Yes, I did, naturally. What's the view from the 87th floor? Yes, it is beautiful, and I hope that you will like it as well. Mr. Putin, today you have 16 countries represented here through its leading information agencies. There were supposed to be more of us. However, our Indian and Brazilian colleagues were not able to travel here because there have been certain issues with the election, and our Egyptian colleagues broke a leg right before the trip, so naturally we wish him to get better as soon as possible. But those who have traveled here would like to welcome you in this most beautiful city of the world, St. Petersburg, and in this new hip place called Lahte Center. Before you can see the people, and we think that they make up for about 80% of the whole global news flow. And throughout the time that we haven't met, many of the countries that they represented all of a sudden became non-friendly countries to Russia. But possibly that would make it even more interesting to take a look at what's happening in these countries and what they think most important. Despite the fact that it's meeting number 8, we like to note that it's taking place when TASS news agency is celebrating 120th birthday. I think it's the first time that such a meeting is taking place amid such complex conditions, and it seems that the world has gone crazy and it's been pushed to the brink on purpose. But we truly hope that after this meeting we'll come maybe a step closer, to understanding the way we can lift this tension, to lower the degree of the double standards and misunderstanding of each other and hostility to boot. Colleagues, as a moderator, on behalf of TASS News Agency, I'll give you the chance to ask you one main question. I don't know whether it will be possible to ask the second question or number 3 question. It will all depend on the president. And we have a wonderful tradition. The first floor goes to the beautiful part of humanity, to women. Why? Because Russia treats women traditionally with love and respect and with awe. So the first question goes to our wonderful Irina Akulovich, Director General of Belta, Belarus Telegraph Agency. She also has a higher education in music, so we'll expect her to set the right tone and tonality to our question. Madam Akulovich, you have the floor. If you'd allow me, I'd like to welcome you all, and possibly you've been held in this tower for half a day, I guess, and I'd like to apologize. I'd like to repeat myself that it's very hard to get out of the grip of Mr. Miller, the head of Gazprom, and he keeps talking about each detail on each element of the building. And his optimism is viral, contagious, so to speak, about the Gazprom activities. People here are very well informed. It's hard for me to imagine what can I tell you that you don't know already. You know it all, and possibly you know even better than I do. Whatever I say, you would still think that you know it better than I do. Therefore, I suggest that we have more of not a Q&A evening, but rather an exchange of opinions. I think it will be more interesting. It will be interesting for me to learn your opinion as well to the questions that concern you. And I think that's all I wanted to say at the outset. So, Madam Akulovich, please, you have the floor. Thank you very much, Mr. President, for this opportunity to have a conversation with you. We understand fully well that indeed you have a very busy schedule. And this meeting is awaited not only by us, but the largest news agencies and the world media are closely following it as well. I'd like to say that the right to ask the first question is not only that we're trying to regulate gender issues, but also because Belarus is the closest nation for Russia. It's not a question, but it's more of an exchange of opinions and a statement. With Alexander Lukashenko, you've met in the 90s, so you know our president for more than 30 years now. There have been very different times in relations between our countries and their relations. Nevertheless, you managed to find all solutions to all matters, security and economic issues. I wanted to ask you, is it hard or is it easy for you now to talk to them? And are there leaders in the European Union with whom you can find solutions to complex issues today? Thank you. Yes, I've known the president of Belarus for a very long time. Indeed, we've been through different times. There were different relations. But since at the very core of the relations there are fundamental interests of both nations, of the people of Russia and the people of Belarus, therefore, we've followed that precisely. And following that, we've managed to find a solution to even most complex issues, seemingly impossible to solve without simple answers. It is why, from the very beginning, we have worked to build, and we continue to do that, to build a union state. And we're successful. We're doing that following the aspirations of our peoples. We're doing very carefully, very calmly, and always when we try to find a solution to any matter, or when we take a step, we're always taking a look at our interests. First and foremost in the sphere of economy, politics, and foreign policy as well. It may seem strange, but also in the environmental sphere and cultural sphere. This set of issues, when we're looking at it comprehensively, at what unites us, that allows us to solve in small issues, sometimes even most complex when they arise. And you know that we have such a relationship that we can always look at something. If we take a look at our trade in dollar equivalent, and it's not a secret, everyone knows that, $48 billion US dollars, almost $50 billion US dollars. And that's impressive. And this economic relationship is very diversified. It goes for agriculture. Almost 90% of the whole export of Belarus is to the Russian market, as for agriculture. As for industrial production and cooperation, quite recently we've discussed in Minsk. It seems that we're constantly in touch and we're always discussing these matters. And my trip, after re-election as a president of Russia, was a seemingly matter of ritual, but not so. We gathered key players from the government, and there were some disputes as well that regarded the industrial cooperation and localization of production. It's a traditional matter. Still, we were talking about our supply of our goods, and first and foremost, oil to the processing plants of Belarus. And we were also talking about products of Belarus going to the Russian market and so on. So all these issues are very tangible, and the quality of life of our citizens depends on them. But I can repeat myself that we have a good sentiment, and aspiration of society helps us always find a solution. You know, sometimes it's out of the box. however strange it may seem, we have such a great relationship and it seems a routine matter, but no, you always have to make an effort to find an answer to the questions that arise. We're successful, and I know that we'll continue so. So there are no difficult matters with Belarus. No, there are such, but the solutions can be found. We always find a solution, because at the foundation of these solutions are the interests of both nations. So can you find such solutions with the leaders of the European Union? Well, you can find it with leaders if they felt more confident. They could find more courage to defend their national interests, but I'm sure that colleagues will talk about that later. Thank you, Madam Makulovich, and I would like to give the floor to the Chief Global News Agency, Madam Samia Nakul. She has traveled through many hotspots and was heavily wounded in Iraq. Please, you have the floor, Madam Nakul. When did this happen with you? When we were in Iraq?
It's during the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Thank you. Thank you for receiving us. Mr. President, given your past interaction with both President Donald Trump and President Biden, can you give us, according to your perspective and your views, which one do you think would be the most favorable candidate or, to U.S. and Russian relations, given the ongoing war that is going on in Ukraine now?
I have already spoken about that, and everyone perceived my statement about President Biden with a smirk, so to speak. And in that, they saw some kind of a hidden critique of President Biden. Well, indeed, he's an old-school politician. And the fact that he didn't like it, and to a certain extent, he started to attack me. Well, I knew that that would happen. That means that I was right and he's predictable. That only confirms our notions about what I've talked about. But in general, we don't really care, because President Trump, ex-President Trump, who was accused of being a spy for Russia, we know that it's pure nonsense, just garbage, just an element of domestic political infighting between Democrats and Republicans. Baseless, ridiculous accusations against Trump. Well, we have always perceived that as an element of domestic bickering in the United States. That was later confirmed during a national investigation in the U.S., and there were no connection with President Trump. It never existed. However, what remains a fact is that he, during his presidency, started to introduce massive sanctions against the Russian Federation. He left the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. That happened during his presidency. So, and I'm speaking very sincerely now, that we believe, thinking that something will change in the U.S. policy regarding Russia, we don't think that anything will change. No serious changes will take place. But what's happening in the United States, you know it fully well. What happens during the political infighting, they're burning themselves from the inside. Their political system, their state. And I have to say it, whether it's pleasant or not. And their alleged leadership in democracy, they're also burning to the ground. Because it is apparent to the rest of the world that the prosecution of Trump, especially in court, on the allegations that happened due to events that happened years ago, without direct proof, well, this is purely using the court system for political purposes. It is apparent to us here in Russia, and I'm sure that it can be seen in the UK as well, and the rest of the world can see that as well. And most importantly, they think that in the United States as well, because after a well-known decision of the court, where the jury gave a guilty verdict, we all know that, the ranking of President Trump grew by 6% right away, I think. And donations to his election campaign also increased. What does it tell us? It tells us that the people in the U.S. do not believe the court system, the justice systems of the United States when it makes such decisions, and believe that they're politically motivated. Maybe it's counterintuitive, but in the foreign policy, in domestic policy, and in economic policy as well, I think that today's administration are conducting one mistake after another. Sometimes I get surprised at what's happening. Therefore, we are watching it from a side. We've never interfered in the domestic politics of the United States, and we do not intend to do it, but we'll see what will happen, what it would lead to. I'd like to wrap up my answer with what I've begun. The end result, as we believe, does not have a great significance. We'll work with any president elected by the U.S. people.
You don't think anything will change in terms of their support for Ukraine, for the Ukraine war, if Trump comes back? You don't think there'll be a change?
It's hard to say. I don't think I can make a clear-cut conclusion whether something will change or not. I think we'll need to take a look at the priority of the future administration. If the future administration will follow the national interest, and if they think that the national interest will be to stabilize the situation within the country, not to bet on migration, but to consolidate the society within the United States, to amend the mistakes that led to a tremendous debt and inflation within the U.S., then, naturally, following the domestic national interests, if they would follow them, then they would pursue the goals of global liberalism that I think is destroyed by the United States from the inside. Well, they strive to be the leader of the global liberalism. Well, no. But if they follow the national interest, then maybe there could be some changes in the foreign policy towards Russia and towards the conflict in Ukraine. But remember how many ifs I mentioned. In that case, some changes are possible. But I think you would agree with me that no one is interested in the United States, in Ukraine. They're interested in the magnificence, in the supremacy and leadership of the United States in the world. And they don't want to allow any kind of success by Russia. Indeed, because they believe that in that case, that will be detrimental to the U.S. leadership. That's the whole point of what the U.S. is doing. But if the future administration changes the priorities for itself, they would set the goals differently, and they would see the essence of their work in strengthening the United States from the inside, finance, economy, building normal relations in the world, more respectful towards everyone, then something may change. I think that it depends on the sentiment in the society. And I think that the sentiment is shifting to that end. And I think that if the future administration will catch that wind in their sails, then the change is possible. Thank you, Madam Nakul. Now I give the floor to the men. I'd like to ask my question to President. Now I'll have to give the floor to Vugar Aliyev, the chair of Azertaj. Please, you have the floor. Mr. Putin, thank you for the time that you have given us. Today, the relations between Azerbaijan and Russia are developing in an upward trend, and recent visit of President Aliyev to Moscow gave a chance not only to celebrate a memorable anniversary, 50 years of the bomb railroad, but also to discuss bilateral relations. What's your take on the future outlook for bilateral cooperation, and in particular the development of the transportation corridor north-south?
Our relations are developing successfully, reliably, and in a pragmatic fashion. You know, we feel the stance of Azerbaijan, which is building our interstate relations based on mutual interests. And also there is an element of mutual sympathy, because otherwise it wouldn't be possible to explain the presence of 300 schools in Russian language in Azerbaijan. Children are being taught in Russian, and I know that President Aliyev is fully supporting the study of the Russian language in Azerbaijan, and we can see that in all aspects, in all spheres, which tells us that the leadership of Azerbaijan believes that the Russian language is going to be something the Azeri citizens are going to need, and they will need that language for further developing our bilateral ties, which are developing. Our trade stands at 4.6 billion US dollars, and the pace of this development is very good, very steady, and we are increasingly diversifying our relations. I'm confident that should we manage to preserve these good intentions on both sides, and in Russia we share those intentions, then the outcomes are going to be great. Of course, there's still a lot that needs to be done, and you are absolutely correct in saying that we need to further develop the logistics, not just the north-south corridor, but also there are other dimensions to that, such as setting up logistics hubs at the Azeri-Russian border, at the Dagestan stretch where the works are currently underway. It also applies to other directions. We have quite a big number of students studying at Russian universities, receiving scholarships from the budget, and we see there is a very big interest in receiving further education. As far as that north-south corridor is concerned, it can turn into an international route which is in high demand, because right from here, cargo, and shipments from the port of St. Petersburg can flow through the European part of Russia, then on to Azerbaijan, and then onwards to the coast of the Gulf, maybe 10 days or so faster than if they were to go through the Suez Canal. We are not saying anything bad about the Suez Canal. It's very good for the world trade, but this new trade would be an additional route, a very good one for shipping goods from the north to the south and vice versa, 10 days faster. This will help us save a lot. This is a very good route, but still there is a lot that needs to be done. We are working on both sides. I am aware that President Aliyev supports this project. We've spoken with him about that on many occasions. The leadership of Iran is also in support of this project, and since this project promises to be very beneficial, there are other foreign investors that have expressed their interest in that route. not regional investors, investors from other, say, the wealth funds, sovereign wealth funds of the Arab countries, because they're always searching for a possibility to invest money in reliable endeavors. There are still issues that need to be studied further, in particular what stretches and where and how they're going to be funded. Is it going to be based on loan, or there's going to be direct funding from Russia? How this is going to fit with the strings that are going to head westwards across the territory of Azerbaijan. We need to finalize some issues with our Iranian friends and partners, or whether it's going to be a narrow gauge or a wide gauge road. I mean, the one that's going to be built on the territory of Iran. But the crux of the matter is, everyone is determined to implement this project. We've set up the directorate. VTB as the organization responsible for that. I'm confident that we will complete this project. Well, it's going to take some time. There are some issues about funding, but this is not the only project we are pursuing together. Apart from that, Azerbaijan is a Caspian state. It's one of the 5 Caspian states, and that means that we've got many joint interests. Some apply to the environment of the Caspian Sea. Thank you, Mr. Aliyev. And now I'd like to give the floor to a state you will never be indifferent to, and that's Germany. We've got Martin Romanchik, head of news of DPA. He knows from first hands about our country, because in the 90s he worked as a correspondent in Moscow. Over to you, sir.
Herr Präsident, vielen Dank für die Einladung.
Good evening, Mr. President. Good evening, everyone. Chancellor Olaf Scholz has agreed to provide weapons to Ukraine. If Chancellor were to change his opinion, what would your stance be then? And what do you think the future of Germany is going to be? Have you made any threats or any warnings to Chancellor when he made the decision to provide weapons to Ukraine? Well, we never threaten anyone, especially if that means threatening the head of another country, because that would be just bad form. We have different positions on different matters. We are aware of the position European countries have taken, and in particular taken by Germany with regard to the developments in Ukraine. Everyone thinks that it was Russia that had started the war in Ukraine. But I would like to underscore that no one in the West, in Europe, wants to remember how this tragedy had started, and it started with a coup d'etat, an anti-constitutional coup d'etat that happened in Ukraine. That's the origin of the war. Is it Russia that is to blame for that coup d'etat? No, it's not. And have those that are trying to accuse Russia forgotten that the foreign ministers of Poland, Germany and France came to Kiev and put their signature to a document aimed at settling the political crisis? They put that signature to the document as guarantors that the crisis would be resolved in a peaceful, constitutional manner. Europe, and in particular France and Germany, prefer to leave that out. And if they were to remember that, then the question would arise, why did the European countries and Germany and France, as guarantors in particular, have not demanded that the Ukrainian leadership should get back to the legal field, as it were? Why have they ignored their responsibilities as the guarantors of those agreements that have been reached? They're the ones to blame. They are guilty of what has transpired, alongside with those forces from the US that provoked the anti-constitutional coup d'etat. This was followed by the desire of the citizens of Crimea to withdraw from Ukraine. Then it was succeeded by the decision of the people of Donbass not to submit to those who had supported the coup d'etat. That's the origin of the conflict. Afterwards, Russia has made every effort to arrive at a formula that would allow to peacefully resolve that conflict. In 2015, Minsk saw the signing of the so-called Minsk agreements. And incidentally, these agreements were endorsed by a decision of the UN Security Council. It's a document that should have been implemented. But it has not been. Instead, a choice was made in favor of addressing that matter in a military manner. Artillery and armed forces started to be used against the civilians in the east of Ukraine. For some reason, in the West, and in Germany, in France, in other countries, no one wants to remember that. So we facilitated the signing of the Minsk agreements. But it turns out that no one intended to observe the agreements. And the former Chancellor of Germany, former President of France, have said that publicly. Mr. Romanchik, what am I supposed to make of that? They have made public statements that they had never intended to observe the Minsk agreements. They only signed them to rearm Ukraine and to create a favorable environment for the continuation of hostilities. So they were simply duped. What other explanation could there be to that? For 8 years, we've been pursuing a peaceful solution to this issue. 8 years. Some time ago, the former Chancellor told me, in Kosovo, yes, NATO had acted without the decision of the UN Security Council, but 8 years blood had been spilled in Kosovo, she said to me. And what about this particular case, when the blood of Russian people was being spilled in the east of Ukraine, in Donbass? Is it not blood? Is it water? For some reason, no one wanted to pay any attention to that. In the end, we were forced to act when the then Ukrainian authorities declared that they were happy with none of the points of the Minsk agreements, and the foreign ministry declared that they were not going to observe the Minsk agreements. That 8 years ago, there was a constant degradation of economy and in human rights. In Donbass, people were killed. So we were forced to recognize their independence. It took us 8 years to do that. We were hoping that we would find a peaceful solution. It was 8 years before it was declared that they were not going to observe the agreements. And once that happened, we had to attempt to use armed force to force them to observe those agreements. But we're not the ones to have started this war. The war started back in 2014 after the coup d'etat and the attempts at silence those who disagreed with the coup d'etat with the use of force, with the use of guns. Now, what did we do afterwards? So it took us 8 years before we recognized their independence, and once we understood that the Minsk agreements were never going to be implemented, please pay attention to that, we recognized the independence of these self-proclaimed republics. Could we have Could we do it from the point of view of international law? As Article 1 of the UN Charter states, we could do that because that amounts to the right of people to self-determination. And the ICJ made a ruling, in written form, which states that if a certain territory of a certain country decides to become independent, it does not have to apply to higher institutions of the said country. And that is what happened in Kosovo. So there is a ruling by the ICJ which says that if a territory decides to become independent, it is not to have to ask for permission from the capital in order for this right to self-determination to be implemented. And if that is the case, if that is what is stated in the ICJ ruling, then those self-proclaimed republics, which back then were not recognized, they were fully entitled to do that, which they did. And what about us? Were we entitled to recognize those republics? Yes, we were. And that is what we did. Then we entered into a treaty with them. Did we have that opportunity, that right to do that? Yes. And that treaty stipulated provision of aid to those republics in case of aggression. And Kyiv was pursuing a war against these countries which it had taken us 8 years to recognize. Did we have that right? Yes, we did. And then, in compliance with Article 51 of the UN Charter, we started to provide our assistance to them. Whatever anyone here says, I told exactly the same things to Secretary General Guterres. I explained the rationale to him. Where is the error? Where is the violation of international law here? There are none. From the point of view of international law, the response is, you attacked anyway. We did not attack. We were defending ourselves, and everyone needs to understand that. And the first step towards the war was made by those who had encouraged the bloody coup d'etat which ran afoul
Good afternoon, happy Wednesday. Can we all make sure not have our badges off during the briefing? Awesome, thank you.
right, good afternoon, everyone. Just get settled here. All right, good afternoon. Just a few things at the top, and then happy to jump in and take questions. Tomorrow, Secretary Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General C.Q. Brown, will join President Biden to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the D-Day operation, Operation Overlord, where thousands of U.S. and allied service members bravely fought, many making the ultimate sacrifice, to defend future generations against the spread of tyranny and evil. The event tomorrow will be live streamed on defense.gov, where you can tune in and watch it. Switching gears, I'd like to provide an update on our cost assessment of the temporary pier, or the Joint Logistics Over-the-Shore capability that is being used to surge humanitarian assistance into Gaza. When we first announced this humanitarian maritime corridor, we estimated that the cost was approximately $320 million. However, lower than expected costs for contracted trucks, drivers, and commercial vessels, and the United Kingdom's contribution of a berthing vessel for our soldiers and sailors have lowered our latest cost assessment to approximately $230 million. While assessments are ongoing, this estimate does include some of the costs associated with the repairs and rebuilding of the pier. And just as a reminder, these are estimates and initial assessments, and the costs could fluctuate depending on the length of the mission and future costs, an example of that being additional repairs. In other news, Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, Bill LaPlante, will depart this week for a trip to Japan to reinforce the importance of U.S.-Japan bilateral relationship for advancing regional peace, stability, and deterrence. While there, he will conduct the first U.S.-Japan Defense Industrial Cooperation, Acquisition, and Sustainment Forum alongside Japan's Acquisition Technology and Logistics Agency. This important forum will promote greater U.S.-Japan defense industrial cooperation and accelerate opportunities for co-development, co-production, and co-sustainment. A full readout of Dr. LaPlante's engagements will be posted on defense.gov at the conclusion of his trip. And lastly, as many of you may have seen, Secretary Austin's Chief of Staff, Ms. Kelly Magsamen, will be stepping down at the end of June. As Secretary Austin stated, Kelly has been instrumental in orchestrating countless strategic initiatives to defend our nation, take care of our people, and succeed through resilience and teamwork. Her leadership, counsel, and selflessness service has made our department stronger, safer, and the lives of our people better. Kelly provided a steady hand guiding the senior staff and the department, which the Secretary will remain incredibly grateful for. And with that, I'd be happy to take your questions. Tara.
Thanks. On the JLOTS cost reduction, that includes the overall operation? It wasn't just sailing everything over there. That's for the ongoing operations. It does include salaries of personnel.
It's everything that has to do with the mission of JLOTS. So that is the total. It does include some of the repair costs that are being done at the Port of Ashdod for the repairing and rebuilding. Those repairs are ongoing, so that's our initial assessment right now. But yes, so it is the total cost to operate JLOTS.
Okay, and then do we have an estimate of when JLOTS will be back up and running, more aid going through?
So as we previewed earlier this week, we're hoping that we will be able to re-anchor the pier into Gaza later at the end of the week. I don't have an exact date for you right now, but when we get closer to that, or when we have an announcement to make, I'll of course, keep you updated.
And then separately, can you confirm that the U.S. provided weapons to Ukraine that the Biden administration is now allowed to be used to strike inside Russia have indeed struck inside Russia?
So I've seen the reports of that. I can't confirm that right now. I'd have to refer you to the Ukrainians to speak to their operations and any weapons used in the, I think you're referring to in the Kharkiv region. I just don't have anything more for you on that. Carla.
Hey, thanks. Just some clarification. I think that John Kirby had said that there was confusion on the Ukrainians shooting into Russian territory, and he said that even aircraft are not, if they're not necessarily in Ukrainian airspace, that the Ukrainians had always been able to shoot at those aircraft. So just to get some clarification on that, has it always been acceptable for Ukrainians to fire into Russian airspace? Was it strictly Russian territory that they were told not to fire into? Give us some clarification on that.
The policy change that you're referring to, and that was announced last week, was more about the crossfire within the Kharkiv region. When it comes to air defenses, and the Secretary spoke about this, air defense is something that we continue to, that we know is a priority for the Ukrainians. Look, I'm not going to go into every specific incident of when the Ukrainians, have engaged, whether it be Russian aircraft or other capabilities. What I can tell you is that we know that is a threat that they continue to face, and that's something that we continue to work with the Ukrainians to make sure that they have the capabilities that they need to defend themselves.
Okay, and I just want to follow up to it. I just want to make sure I understand this, because John Kirby said there's never been a restriction on the Ukrainians shooting down hostile aircraft, even if those aircraft are not necessarily in Ukrainian airspace. So does that mean that Ukrainians can shoot anywhere, not just the region that was changed, where the policy was changed, they can shoot anywhere in Russian airspace if there is a hostile aircraft heading toward Ukraine?
Yeah, Carla, I appreciate the question. I'm not going to, I have nothing to contradict what Mr. Kirby said previously. Air defense is something that we know is a priority for the Ukrainians. That's why we've given them what we have to be able to defend themselves. Russian aircraft, Russian air threats, we are well aware that is something that continues to threaten Ukrainian cities and towns. I'm just not going to get into more specifics. What we have said and what we continue to say is that right now our policy is that we don't support the use of ATACMS for long, deep strikes within Russia. But I just don't have more to add when it comes to anything additional when it comes to aircraft.
Okay, and then one more on the J-lots.
Sure.
You had told Tara that they could be ready to be anchored, this week, later this week. Does that mean that the aid will start flowing potentially later this week as well, or will it take several days after the pier gets re-anchored?
That's a great question. As soon as the temporary pier is re-anchored to the beach in Gaza, we expect aid to flow pretty immediately. We'll keep you updated on that. Tom.
Aircraft, any sense when the F-16s will arrive in Ukraine? I know some of the Ukrainian pilots have been giving interviews.
Don't have an update yet, at least from our side on aircraft. Something that we're working with the Ukrainians on, but don't have a specific date for you.
Ballpark, weeks, months?
I don't have a date for you. Yeah, Janie.
Thank you, Sabrina. Two questions. As you know, due to various provocations, such as North Korea's recent trash balloons, the South Korean government decided to completely suspend the September 19 military agreement. Inter-Korean military agreement. And a manual was sent to the United States and Japan allies. Do you agree with the South Korean government's decision on that?
Yeah, so thanks, Janie, for the question. I don't really have anything to add on to that. What I can tell you is, we continue and always will consult with our partners in the region, like the Republic of Korea, like Japan. Obviously have continued to monitor the recent actions of the DPRK, but I just don't have anything to add on that front.
All right, thank you. Another one. At the recent U.S. and ROK Defense Ministerial meeting at the Shangri-La Security Conference, Secretary Austin said that South Korea's support for nuclear-powered submarines is different from Australia's support for nuclear-powered submarines. South Korea and the United States are allies, so why is the support different?
Sorry, Janie, I'm not sure that I fully captured the quote on that exactly. I think you're paraphrasing some of the words that the Secretary used. We continue to work with our partners in the Indo-Pacific. In terms of what the Secretary said, I don't have anything additional to add, so I'm just going to let his comments stand for what they were. I'm just going to go to the phones here. Jeff Shogel, Task and Purpose.
Thank you, and I apologize if this has already been addressed in another briefing, but is there going to be anything different when the J-Lots pier is re-anchored to make sure that it deals with the surf and the tides better, so the chances of it breaking up again are less? Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for the question. So I think it's important to remember that for a little over a week, JLOTS was operating quite efficiently. We were able to get, in total over 1,000 metric tons into Gaza. What happened was something that was quite unprecedented. It was the high sea states and then that storm that changed direction and created an untenable environment for JLOTS to operate in. There's no change to how JLOTS is going to continue to operate. What we are going to do is continue to monitor weather conditions. If there is a time and place where the commander feels that there's another storm coming and out of an abundance of caution, removes that temporary pier for whether it be hours or a day, I could see that potentially happening in the future, but obviously it's hard to predict the future when it comes to weather. So right now, no change. JLOTS is going to operate as it did before, and it was successful in that regard. We're going to work to continue to get humanitarian aid into the Palestinian people who need it most, and that aid should flow hopefully almost immediately as soon as the pier is re-anchored into the beach of Gaza. I'm going to take one more from the phone, and then I'll come back into the room. Idris Ali, Reuters.
Hey, do you have any update on the service member who was in critical condition after the injury they suffered? And then second question, I think it was a couple of weeks ago now, you had talked about how the Pentagon was still assessing whether the Israeli assessment of what happened with the World Food Kitchen staff was something you believe to be accurate. It's now 2 months. Do you have an assessment? And if not, is the department actually making a good faith effort to find out what happened, or have you kind of moved on from that?
I'll take the last one first. So in terms of the World Kitchen strike, you have to remember it's not just the department. It is an interagency effort. So we have, been briefed on some of the findings. There were some delays to additional briefings that I think due to some of the events that were happening on the ground. It's something that we're still assessing. I know that's not, I know that's frustrating for you to hear, but it is something that we are still assessing. We certainly haven't forgotten about it. But it's not just the Department of Defense, receiving this assessment and analyzing it. It is an interagency effort. And as you probably know, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, was also in the region, meeting with his Israeli counterparts, receiving updates. So it's something that we're certainly attuned to, but I just don't have a better readout for you today from the podium. Thank you for asking about the soldier who was injured. An update on his condition. Yesterday, the soldier and his family were transported via military aircraft from Israel to San Antonio, Texas. The soldier is receiving treatment at Brooke Army Medical Center and remains in critical condition. Of course, our thoughts and prayers are with him and with his family. I just don't have more for you other than that update. But thank you for the question. Come back in the room, Tony.
Strike question.
Sure.
The New York Times did a pretty good story over the weekend about the Rafah strike that killed those 45 or so people. They identified down to the serial number that a small diameter bomb was used. Can the Pentagon confirm at this point that, yeah, unfortunately, a small diameter bomb was responsible for the damage? And have small diameter bomb shipments continued unabated during the conflict?
So we've only paused that one shipment of the 2,000-pound bombs. I don't have any updates on shipments in terms of those are through FMS sales and FMF. So I would refer you to the State Department on any additional weapons shipments to Israel. In terms of your question on the reporting on the small diameter bomb, I cannot confirm that. I've seen the reports, but I just can't confirm that. I'd refer you to the Israelis to speak to their operations.
As part of your guidance or your office that looks at mitigating civilian harm, are they looking at the forensics of this thing in terms of whether, in fact, the U.S. bomb was used? That would seem to be a task of theirs.
I think we've been very clear from the beginning that there's been too many civilians that have been killed in this war. It's something that we've said privately and publicly. Our departments are looking at things holistically. I don't have more for you on this particular incident. I can't confirm the reports. What I can tell you is that in every single call that the Secretary has with Minister Gallant, this comes up. The use of how they're conducting their operations, the importance of upholding humanitarian law and the laws of armed conflict. I just don't have more for you on this particular incident.
I need to ask you about Ms. Magnuson's exit, too. You know, her name came up quite a bit during the January fiasco about the hospital stay. And the IG is still working on the report. Is her exit at all connected with an looming release of a Pentagon Inspector General report that may be critical of her conduct?
I think the Chief of Staff to the Secretary has served in this position for, I think, upwards of 3.5 years, also served on transition. I think she has deserved some well-deserved time off before she pursues other opportunities. I have no idea when the IG is going to release their report. That is why the IG is independent and separate. I have no idea when that's coming. So no, I think this, Kelly decided to leave when she did because after 3.5 years, I think she's earned some well-deserved time off.
Fair enough, thanks.
Yeah, Liz.
Thanks. To follow up on Idris's question on the injured service member, can you say how they were injured?
It was a non-combat injury that happened on a ship that was away from the pier, but for more specifics, I don't have that for you right now.
Okay, and separately, today the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance released a bulletin warning of China's increased efforts to recruit Western pilots. What is the U.S. military doing to deter its own pilots, former pilots, service members from, taking these bribes and training Chinese pilots?
I think also, loyalty to your country, I think is certainly one that we always, impart on our service members. It's something that we're certainly aware of. You've seen it. It's a joint report. I don't really have more to add. But it's something that we certainly take seriously. And we, of course, always expect that our pilots will uphold the standards that they are trained under and that they, keep their training specific to the United States.
And just to follow up, in general, generally speaking, why is it concerning that Western pilots would be training Chinese pilots? Can you just explain if there's any national security risks from that?
I think you answered your own question with that. I think there are national security risks there. I don't have more to add. I think the report goes into a few more details on like warnings and sort of our concerns, but I don't have more to add to it. Oren.
I just wanted to ask, follow up on Tony's question, just to be clear. Kelly Maximon's departure her own decision? And was it in any way related to the notification failures?
Complete own decision, and no. I'd have to remind you that what you're referring to happened much earlier in this year in January. It is June. The Secretary has conducted, I don't know how many trips off the top of my head this year, but he just concluded his 10th trip to the Indo-Pacific. He is in France. Kelly is on that trip. She has been on many trips this year. So no. And you saw his statement. I think that is truly someone that has demonstrated an incredible dedication to service, to this department, and of course to the Secretary. And so, we certainly wish her well, and she is, I hope whatever she does next, I hope it's filled with a lot of sleep and hopefully catching up with friends and family. Tara.
Just to follow on that, what is the update on the Secretary's cancer treatment? Is he completely in remission? Is he still seeking treatment? I know we've seen previous statements saying, it's being handled, but what's the
status? His prognosis remains excellent. I mean, as someone that has a family member that has gone through something similar, when your prognosis is excellent, you continue to be monitored by your doctors. You're not necessarily getting treatment, but your doctors are continuing to monitor for you in case anything, were to come up. If it's 6 months, a year check-ins, whatever that is. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not going to pretend to speak on behalf of, give you a doctor's analysis from here, but his cancer prognosis remains excellent. Every time that he's gone to Walter Reed Medical Center or any type of doctor's appointment, we certainly read that out and let you know about that. But I just don't have more to add on that.
I guess my question is, has he continued to get some form of cancer treatment to keep things in check, or did everything kind of stop after that one,
Not to my knowledge. His cancer prognosis, I know, I'm not trying to be a broken record here, but it is excellent. Doctors will obviously continue to monitor anyone's cancer prognosis whenever you're diagnosed, but I'm not aware that he's still being treated for anything in relation to that. All right. Okay. One more question. Yeah.
So, Sabrina, what's your assessment of the shooting of at U.S. Embassy in Lebanon? Probably U.S. State Department has more to say, but do you have anything?
So we're monitoring what happened on the ground there. I would refer you to the State Department to speak more to the incident. I believe it was around the U.S. Embassy and that an investigation is being conducted. But I think we're very grateful and thankful for the Lebanese armed forces and the international security forces that are there. All of our U.S. personnel at the embassy are safe, but I would direct you to the State Department for more information. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.
The Communist Party of China is the leading political force in China. Everything that's done over there is done under the guidance of the Communist Party of China. There's something I would like to draw your attention to. I said that. I don't know whether I said that in this format and whether that's going to be interesting to you, but there are some experts in Russia, very good economists, quite young people, albeit already very experienced. They say that the analysis of what's happening in China's economy and the analysis of what's happening in other economies across the world, including the leading economies such as the US, show that China has succeeded in building an efficient, albeit peculiar, economic model that might be even more efficient than the one of the US. And judging by the results the economy of China is demonstrating, this is something we can agree on. Yes, there might be some discussion. Some Western partners of ours say that China's economy is not entirely based on market. There are regulations by the party, but, you know, the outcome is out there for everyone to see. And it shows us that this model is more efficient. And no one would dare accuse China of that. whether that's market-based or not. It's 1.5 billion people, and the Chinese leadership needs to think about every citizen, each and every citizen, and not all of them live on the same level as an average European or American citizen. So it's up to the leadership of China to take the decisions that will allow them to see to the needs, vital needs of Chinese citizens. And all of that is done thanks to a good friend of mine and the leader of China, President Xi Jinping. They're achieving great successes, doing that reliably and steadily, and we can only be happy for them. We're aware of everything that's happening in the world's leading economies, including China's economy. China's economy is generally very reliable, and it's becoming increasingly based on high technology. And I think it's a huge mistake on the part of the US and a number of European countries that are trying to somehow stymie or bring down the pace of the Chinese economy, because I think in order for them to be successful, they would need to fit those processes, to integrate them, rather than trying to obstruct them. Some very smart people say that China is overproducing cars and also overproducing electric cars. Who is saying such things? It's those who believe themselves to be proponents of the market. Don't they know who decides whether there is an overproduction or not? It's up to the market to decide. If China produces a certain number of cars and all of that is consumed and absorbed by the market, what kind of an overproduction are we talking about? It's just nonsense. Is it possible to call that an overproduction? No, that's not called that. That's not what it's called. It's called an attempt at stymieing the growth through non-market means, and that is harmful, in particular to the US economy. And why is that? Because you're not taking goods from China, these goods or those goods. What will it result in? Will it result in themselves producing something? No, it'll produce in having to buy from elsewhere, and this is going to be more expensive. This will result in higher inflation rate, and the higher inflation rate is going to have a nefarious impact upon the economic structure of the country that is doing such things. And it's going to be harmful, in this particular case, to the economy of the US. It's an error, a mistake, yet another one. Yet another mistake of the current administration of the US. As for China, yes, they have a very professional guidance by President Xi, and they are moving ahead at a very good pace. There are other fields. I've always spoken about them, and I can tell you that our cooperation in the international arena is a moderating factor and also a source of stability. You know, we conducted exercises, and we are going to continue conducting exercises, including military exercises. We're also engaged in military and technical cooperation, and we've got a lot to offer to our Chinese friends. And there's an interest on China's side in this kind of cooperation. But our cooperation is not confined either to economy or to military technical cooperation or to international cooperation. This year, we've proclaimed cross years of culture, and our moderator, said that Russian songs, you speak Russian, and I think this is just as important as the rest that I've just spoken about, because that lays the foundations of relationships between the peoples, it creates a favorable environment for pursuing relations across all other sectors. And this is something we'll strive to stick to henceforth. And I am hopeful that we will be able to meet with President Xi and speak about all of these issues. And, well, I hope we'll be able to meet within the framework of the SCO and BRICS. Mr. President, you know, I interviewed you 3 times. First time it happened in 2002. So it happened a long time ago. The interviews took place in Moscow and Beijing. This is the 4th interview, and it's in the city you were born in, and I'm very grateful to you for that. I wish you all the best. Thank you, Mr. Liu. Next, over to Spain. EFA News Agency, José Manuel Sanz Mingate, Director of International Relations of EFA News Agency, is a very professional, experienced journalist and also an outstanding expert on philosophy and history, an expert on European integration. Sir, over to you.
Sí, gracias, presidente, por la oportunidad.
Thank you, Mr. President, for this opportunity to meet you. I do not speak Russian, but I have read Russian authors. I am aware of Russia's great contribution to literature, science, and art. I think it's a pity that we're currently going through such a difficult phase in international relations. So I have a very delicate question, you know, starting from tomorrow and until Sunday, 25 countries, European countries, are conducting elections. And you know that analysts, experts, as well as officials of European countries say that Russia is guilty of spreading misinformation with a view to destabilizing the electoral processes across Europe. What's your comment on that? Do you think the Russian government is behind this misinformation campaign? Thank you. Well, listen, we've just had a conversation with your colleague from Germany. Among other things, we have spoken about the economic situation in European countries. It's, you know, the social politics is a function of the economic situation. It's a function of the income of your citizens. It's also a function of new jobs being created in an economy, or a function of consumption. On the whole, European countries are well-to-do states. And the major preoccupation of citizens is their material well-being. However, as a result of policies pursued by the overwhelming majority of Western countries, in particular European countries, this well-being people have grown accustomed to over the recent decades is fading. Well, if it's not fading, at least it's currently come under risk, under threat. People feel that, and they understand that. And I think this is the main reason why traditional political parties and the parliamentary democracy at large are going through some rough patch. And if there's someone in Europe who doesn't want to analyze the mistakes they had made, and they're trying to shift the blame on some external factors, then it'll constitute yet another mistake that will prevent them from drawing the right conclusions and understanding full well what is really happening. That's the first part of my answer to your question. And the second goes as follows. Our media, in terms of their volume, the scope, their audience, and their capacity of exerting their influence of their audience, well, they are no match for the Western media, the press or internet media. I would hate to give you the wrong figures. My colleague is going to give you the figures. But whenever and wherever our journalists are trying to do their work, they run into obstacles. Their employees are threatened, their accounts, bank accounts are shut down, their transport is seized. The list goes on. Is that what freedom of speech is? Certainly not. The only thing our media are doing, our Russian journalists are doing, is presenting the Russian view on the developments in our country and across Europe as well as across the globe. Our views differ, but isn't that the idea? Is the goal of media to service the needs of the government? Well, even if it's the point of view of the Russian government, does not it deserve to be communicated to the audience in our country and in other countries? Isn't this what free flow of information is all about, whether you like that information or not? What are we supposed to do if you don't like some kind of information, or if someone thinks that it's biased? Well, you need to present another point of view, and you have to do that in a more convincing manner than the information you don't like is being communicated in, rather than shutting down media. In this particular case, Russian media that are constantly harassed in Europe and in the US.
And there are so few of them, just one or two. And they're all being strangled and closed down. And they're still referencing the fact that we are having some kind of influence on the public opinion in the Western countries. If you simply take a look at the volume, what we are prepared to provide as a content in the information market of the Western countries, it's simply laughable. It's not a matter of someone conducting some kind of a nefarious policy against the European Union, in this case. It's a matter of the fact that what the leadership of major European countries have brought their economies to, what kind of state, and what kind of policy they're conducting in an international arena, and whether their people like it or not. And I'll repeat with what I've started. You shouldn't shift blame elsewhere. You need to take stock of your own actions and hold yourself accountable. That would allow you to draw some right conclusions and possibly course correct, if necessary. Thank you. Mr. Migoda, was that enough? Yes, okay. And next is Kazakhstan, Director General of Kazinform News Agency. Oscar, please, you have the floor. Mr. President, could you please tell us about the future of relations between Kazakhstan and Russia as neighboring countries? It's very good. No other way to put it. We have very close, well, not just close, we have ally and strategic partnership cooperation that fully applies to Russia and Kazakhstan and their relations. This applies to trade and economic ties. They're showing sustained growth each year. And the level of our trade also speaks about that, the growing volume trade. We have many dimensions of our cooperation. It's impossible even to list them all. Energy, industrial cooperation, outer space, a lot of them. We have a tremendous land border, and people connect to each other. 76 regions of the Russian Federation have direct relations with Kazakhstan, with the territories in Kazakhstan. Direct ties. And they're possibly even more efficient, and they work even better because people are directly talking to each other. They know each other and trust each other. With Mr. Tokayev, we're always in touch. We have very good relations based on trust. And now, if we talk about energy, you know that we're going to sell gas not only to Uzbekistan, but to Kazakhstan as well. To the northern Kazakhstan, they require energy. Yes, Kazakhstan is itself a producer of energy. Still, there are some regions of Kazakhstan that require gas supply, and it's easier and cheaper to receive it from us than to build new routes that would cost billions of dollars. Honestly, I don't see a single issue that would be of dispute and would complicate our relations in any way. We spoke about cooperation with China. 90% of our trade is done in national currencies with the People's Republic of China. And the same is happening in our relations with Kazakhstan. I think we're at about almost 100%. As for the United States, well, and naturally it'll be the same kind of questions later at the plenary session in SPIF. One of the greatest mistakes of the United States is they're prohibiting from using dollar as in international payments and using it as a tool, and they're simply undermining the trust towards dollar. It's ridiculous. They should have taken care of the dollar and to preserve it and to raise its profile and its standing. They're simply killing it off with their own hands. But that stimulates us to move towards national currencies. It turns out it doesn't stand in the way of developing our relations. On the contrary, it helps us strengthen our national currencies. Humanitarian sphere and education sphere are also a matter of our cooperation. So we have a very active joint work in all spheres, and also thanks to President Tokayev, because he's continuing our cooperation in all these spheres. Soon we're going to meet in Astana for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit and so on. Naturally, I have the invitation. I will make use of it. Thank you. Now, moving on to the next participant. Deputy Head of ANSA Agency, Stefana Poli. Mr. Poli, just like Sami Yanakul from Reuters, has tremendous experience of working in hotspots. And in general, ANSA, Italian agency, never missed a meeting with you, and they're our permanent guests. Mr. Poli, you have the floor. Thank you. Good evening, Mr. President. Thank you for organizing this meeting. I'd like to ask you a question about the latest events in Ukraine. Secretary General of NATO, Mr. Stoltenberg, suggested that Ukraine be given an opportunity to strike the Russian territory using the weapons procured from Europe. Some European countries agreed with this notion, including the United States. Not all of them, but the United States are also close to it. Still, some countries are holding discussions about sending military instructors and counselors. I'd like to ask you to comment on these two decisions. What will be Russian response to that? Thank you. As for counselors and instructors and their presence there is nothing new. They are already present on the Ukrainian territory. Unfortunately for them, they're incurring losses. I know that for sure. It's not done targetedly, but it just happens. But the European countries and the United States prefer to keep that silent. Secondly, as for high-precision, long-range weapons, I think we need to break this topic down into two. First, conventional arms, multiple launch rocket systems of 70-kilometer range or so. They have been used for a very long time. Indeed, the Ukrainian servicemen can do that on their own. Now, as for high-tech, modern, high-precision, precision-guided, long-range weapons, such as Storm Shadow of UK or ATACMS of the US, or the French missiles as well. Well, and it bears repeating, since I've said it before when I traveled to Central Asian countries. ATACMS, 300 kilometers range. How are they used? How are they transferred? Well, they've transferred the missile system. It was given by Pentagon, by the US. How it is used? The Ukrainian servicemen cannot independently conduct a strike with this missile. They're technologically incapable of doing it. For that, they require satellite reconnaissance, intelligence, and based on that intelligence data, this is U.S. Satellite intelligence, they need to put in the flight task, the flight mission of the missile, and later put it into the missile system. And the serviceman standing next to the missile is doing that simply automatically. He's just pushing the buttons. He mustn't even know what happens next. What could be the participation of the Ukrainian servicemen? Not those who are typing the buttons, but higher. They can choose the target. They can say what's the priority target for them. But they do not decide whether to strike this target or not. Because, yet again, the flight mission of the missile is basically typed in only by those who are providing the weapons. If it's ATACMS, it's done by Pentagon. Storm Shadow is done by the UK. It's even simpler sometimes because the flight mission is typed in automatically without the servicemen on the ground. It's done automatically by the UK then. That's it. And when the Bundeswehr officers were thinking whether to strike the Crimean Bridge or any other facilities, well, they were thinking for themselves, right? It wasn't done for them. That's what they were going to do. And the same applies to the French specialists. So it is done by the Western specialists. Therefore, we foster no illusion about that. Well, how are we to respond? Naturally, we'll improve our anti-missile defense systems. Air defense systems will destroy these incoming missiles. Second, we're thinking that if someone believes it possible to provide such weapons to the military, to the war zone in order to conduct strikes against our territory and to create issues for us, then why don't we have an opportunity to provide the same class of weapons to those regions of the world where the strikes will be conducted against sensitive facilities of those countries who are doing that against Russia? Therefore, the response might be asymmetrical, and we will think about that. Number 3, such actions, well, they've deteriorated, they've changed the situation for the worse, and they will continue to deteriorate the international situation and undermine international security. In the end, if we see that such countries are engaged in the war against the Russian Federation, and that is a direct participation in the war against the Russian Federation, we leave ourselves the right to respond the same way. It's a path towards very serious issues. I think that's it. If you have any other follow-up questions, I think that I'm unlikely to add something else. Any other questions, Mr. Pauly? Or you've heard everything you wanted? I have yet another question, but I don't know whether it's the right moment to ask it. There won't be any other moment. We'll just leave now, so you should ask. I wanted to ask you a question about Italy, if I may. Italy supports Ukraine, politically and militarily. But it also makes statements that Italy is not in the state of war with Russia. If you could please comment on the position of the Italian leadership. We see the position of the Italian government is more moderate than the policy of many other European countries. And we pay attention to it, and we give it the necessary evaluation then. We see that there is no caveman Russophobia being spurred on in Italy, and we keep that in mind as well. We expect that in Italy, maybe, after the situation would be turning for the better in the Ukrainian region, well, maybe our relations will bounce back, and possibly even faster than with any other European country. Thank you, Mr. Pauly. Next, we have Korea, Digital Development Executive Director, Mr. Park Son-hoon. You have the floor, sir. Russia is cooperating with North Korea in development of the Far East, and in a great fashion. When the South Korean ambassador provided you with his credentials, you said that there could be development of relations. What is the outlook for that? You know, just like in our relations with Italy, we see that there is no Russophobic sentiment in the work of the leadership of the Republic of Korea. There are no direct supplies of munition to the conflict zone, and we highly appreciate that. But we can also see that there are certain attempts of sales to the U.S. companies to further repurpose it for the Ukrainian region, and we are closely following that. However, we truly hope that Russian-South Korean relations will not deteriorate, considering our interest in the development of bilateral relations in terms of the Korean Peninsula in general. Unfortunately, everything that's happening has a negative impact on trade and economic ties. But we truly hope that the foundation laid in the previous decades, the level of our relations, will be maintained at least partially in order to have the chance to rebuild it in the future. Today, unfortunately, many spheres of our cooperation have been discontinued by the Republic of Korea. They have created certain issues, and we're truly sorry. We're working with other countries. Though we could have continued to work with the Republic of Korea, but it's not our choice. It's the choice of the Korean leadership. But as for us, our door is open. We're prepared for it. Thank you very much, Mr. Park, for your question. Mr. Putin, if you would allow me, I'd like the question on behalf of TASS News Agency. Yes, please go ahead. I would like us to go back to the Russian economy. You know, this is just like, as people say, please keep talking about it. You spoke about the current state of economy, but there were, if you remember, there were people who said that the Russian economy is in tatters. And then they were sanctioned multiple times, hundreds of sanctions. Now it's 3 years of the special military operation. What's the future outlook for Russian economy? Is it just as wonderful as the current state? What do you think?
Some of our ill-wishers believe that those multiple sanctions, 16 or 17,000, is unprecedented. There's no other country of the world against which as many sanctions would have been slapped. Certainly these sanctions are an impediment. But those ill-wishers estimate that in the mid-term this will have a deleterious effect on the Russian economy in this or that way. And there are grounds to that claim. And those who believe that have grounds for that, especially as far as high-tech and other domains are concerned, microelectronics, AI, everyone knows, you know, the problematic domains, as it were. But there is a but coming. You know, even during the best years of our relations with the so-called collective West, some of the cocoa sanctions were never annulled or cancelled, so the restrictions remained in place. And I have every reason to believe that, you know, expecting close cooperation in the most sensitive issues is not something that would have happened. We shouldn't have expected that to happen in the first place. Of course, issues do come up, but strange as it may sound, even to us, we rise up to the task and overcome. We used to buy many things from abroad, but then we run into an obstacle. We can no longer buy some things. We've got to think, to use our brains. We have to look and turn to our producers, our designers, and they are not simply replacing those who have withdrawn from our market. I'm talking about the Western producers, but they are picking that up, taking the relay, as it were, and replace them with their production. This is the effect our ill-wishers did not expect, nor did we expect that ourselves. You know, I'm not gonna say what domain it is, but, you know, there was something they bought from France, like a cistern or something. The metalwork was quite complicated. Then the supplies stopped. I asked, what did you do? They set up a production facility in Nizhny Novgorod and they replaced that. And now it's 3 times cheaper than it used to be when it was imported from France. And this is a real-life example, and it happened it happens across many industries. Hence, the growth we're experiencing, the growth of 3.4% in our GDP. Of course, this growth will run into certain limits. These new niches currently occupied by Russian producers and the subsequent steps in developing the niches the European and Western producers have left. All of that is going to run into limits, into certain restrictions. So currently we've set some strategic objectives, and one of the objectives we have set forth is technological independence. We used to pursue this path in the past, and we are going to continue along this path. We will invest resources so that we can catch up and maybe take a leap forward, you know, maybe jump forward in technological matters. Whether we'll succeed, I cannot tell you right now, but we're optimistic. I think we will be successful. And especially if everything changes and we, you know, if we get cheap, high-tech goods, then maybe the economic actors will switch back to Western producers that provide goods at a good price and of high quality. But if it does not happen, we will have to do that on our own. Maybe we'll have to revise our forecasts further into the future. You know, there's one example I always cite. There is the MS-21 aircraft we're producing, and there is air wing. It's not just metal, but also some reinforcement. The U.S. administration has slapped some sanctions on that, saying that there are some dual-use materials involved. But, you know, there's no dual use. It's just a competitor for Boeing 737. It's a mid-range, mid-haul aircraft. And we've managed to replace those reinforcements we used to get from the U.S. It's taken us 2 years longer, but still, I do not doubt that we will succeed, but it's all about the time that it's going to take us. Of course, the deadlines are important because there is competition. We are fully cognizant of that. We'll try to stay ahead. But I wouldn't say there are some critical difficulties involved in overcoming the sanctions, and I do hope that that will be that's going to be the case going forward. And it's only logical to give the floor to a representative of the country that's leading in terms of slapping sanctions. There are 3,500 sanctions. We have News Director for Europe and Africa at the Associated Press, James Jordan. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, President Putin, for this opportunity to address you directly. Over 2 years ago, you sent Russian troops into Ukraine, as you say, to protect Russians and Russian speakers in the Donbass region and to keep NATO from your country's eastern border. Since then, thousands have died on both sides, and the fighting has even come to some regions of Russia. In the last few hours, it's been confirmed to the Associated Press by a Western official that Ukraine has used US weapons on Russian soil in the last few days. Do you see this as a further provocation, to follow on from my colleague from ANSA's question? Could you sum up for us what you feel Moscow has achieved in the last 2 years? And how does the fighting stop?
The first thing we did was to perform our duty to the the first thing we did was to perform our duty to the people that had been suffering of the coup d'etat and the ensuing hostilities unfolding in the southeast part of Ukraine. We recognized the rights of the people living in these territories to protect their interests, to protect their lives and the lives of their children. And in my view, this is the most important thing. We have also demonstrated both to ourselves and to the world at large that we're not just talking about protecting our interests, but are also walking the walk, and we will continue to do that regardless of what happens. And everyone will have to take that into account. As far as the second part of your question is concerned, what needs to be done for the fighting to stop in Ukraine? As a representative of the US, I can tell you something I once told President Biden. Some time ago, he sent a letter to me, and I sent a letter to him. In response, I said, if you want the fighting in Ukraine to stop providing weapons. And, you know, it's going to take us 2, maximum 3 months for the fighting to stop. That's the first thing. Secondly, we call on everyone not to hamper the peace process. Distinguished Mr. Jordan, I have to remind you of what was happening at the end of 2022. We did reach an agreement with Ukraine. We were willing to sign an agreement with them which responded to a number of important issues. The first issue was ensuring the security of Ukraine. And in the draft agreement, Ukraine entered such a formula that said that Ukraine was not a NATO member, that it was a neutral state, but the security guarantees were formulated in such a way that it was very close to the formulas used in the Washington Treaty, Article 4, Article 5. I do not think there's any need for me to go into detail, but that basically meant that all those who signed, the signatories, assumed the responsibility to provide assistance to Ukraine. It was a difficult decision for us. I said we had to give it some thought, but I said we were willing to contemplate that. And the same applied to the Russian interest, because the neutral status of Ukraine met the interests of Russia, the block-free status, some restrictions on weapons, and this is something Russia is interested in. Moreover, we spoke about denazifying Ukraine. And I was very surprised when the questions started coming on what denazifying actually meant. Denazifying involves a legal ban on Nazi propaganda. Strange as it may sound, we managed to find common ground here too, just as we managed to find common ground with a view to finding a peaceful resolution to this crisis situation. And if the head of the negotiating team from Ukraine, he put his signature to the agreement, he initialed the document, and that probably means that Ukraine on the whole was okay with that draft agreement. And if we gave our consent to that, that meant that we were okay with that agreement as well. I would hate to put you on the spot, but a rhetorical question nonetheless. Why did Mr. Johnson come to Kiev? Why did he recommend throwing that draft agreement to the dustbin? Why did he put the goal before the Ukrainian counterparts to seek a victory in the battlefield, to seek a strategic defeat of Russia? Ukraine and its officials have publicly stated that had they signed the agreement, the war would have been over at the end of 2022. It's not we who are saying that. It's the words of the Ukrainian officials in Kiev, and they say that publicly. So a rhetorical question: why did someone need to prevent us from signing this peace treaty with Ukraine? I can only speculate. Someone wanted to secure some additional objectives they set forth for themselves on their Russian foreign policy track. They wanted to push Russia towards collapse. They wanted to secure Russia's strategic defeat, no matter the price. So you asked the question. I do hope that I've given you a comprehensive answer. And when you have the opportunity to talk to the leadership of your country, do ask them this question: why did you prevent the peace treaty between Russia and Ukraine from being signed? I've only shared my speculations with you. Maybe there's another answer. Maybe there is an official, comprehensive answer to that question. I cannot speak for my colleagues in the UK or the US, but Mr. Johnson did come, and maybe he did come not just of his own volition, he did that with the support of the US administration, and I do not doubt that this is what happened.
With your permission, may I ask a very brief other question away from Ukraine regarding the American reporter Evan Gershkovich, who's been in custody for more than a year now. There's been no evidence made public about what crimes he may have committed. Can you give us the latest on any talks that might be happening with the US as regards his release and when we might expect to see him?
Well, you know, you think he is not guilty of anything. The Russian law enforcement agencies and the Russian special services believe that he committed an illegal act of espionage. I'm not going to go into detail right now. I'm aware that the US administration is truly undertaking energetic steps to secure his liberation. But these matters are not addressed through the media outlets. They prefer to be addressed in a very calm, professional manner through the dialogue between the special services. And of course, they have to be addressed on the basis of reciprocity, inclusively, and the competent bodies of Russia and the US are in contact on this matter. Thank you, Mr. Jordan. And next, over to Turkey, Deputy Director General, Editor-in-Chief of Anadolu News Agency, Yusuf Ozhan. Over to you, Mr. Ozhan, your question.
Thank you so much for having us today here, Mr. President. Actually, I'd like to ask a question, a follow-up question on the question that I posed 3 years ago, again, during the anniversary of the Economic Forum. It was over Zoom. It's happy to see you in face-to-face. It is about the Gaza, war in Gaza right now. Millions of people around the world are opposing the attacks against the Gaza people, which is amount to the level of genocide right now. And what Russia has or is intent to play a role in the solution of the situation right now in Gaza? And do you have any intention to also get the Security Council in motion? Because the people, not only the Gazan people, but the Palestinian people in general, and the people of different origins, religion, ethnicity, free from any identity backgrounds. The people of the world are actually asking for the big powers to finish what is happening right now on the ground in Gaza. Thank you.
The first thing I would like to point out is that we are certainly against terrorism in all its forms, any manifestations. We are against attacks against civilians whenever and wherever that happens, and in any, no matter in what country it happens. But what's currently happening in Gaza in response to the terrorist attack in Israel, well, it doesn't resemble a war very much. It's total extermination of civilian population. I can only reiterate Russia's official position on this issue. We believe this is the outcome of the U.S. policy, because the U.S. has monopolized the Israeli-Palestinian settlement, pushing all the previously established mechanisms aside, discarding those mechanisms, collective mechanisms, which were set up precisely for the purpose of finding a solution to this issue. Maybe some in the administration believed that the fewer opinions were put forth, the quicker it's going to be to secure an agreement, but the practice has disproved that point. Secondly, addressing this matter through some material handouts is not going to yield the result that's required. We've spoken about that. We doubt that the resolution of political issues related to the future of a Palestinian nation can be replaced by economic benefits.
There should be the right conditions in order to solve certain issues. Still, they need to be solved in their essence. You need to solve the political matters. What is the main one of them? Is that creation of the two states as stipulated initially, when the UN decided to create two states on that territory, the Palestine state and the state of Israel. Therefore, without solving the key issues, as it seems to me, it would be impossible, the matter in its essence. It would be hardly possible. I have to say that the Russian position is a principled one in this regard. It does not change with time nor the situation. We have long recognized the Palestine state as such during the Soviet times. In this sense, our position remains unchanged. We know that President Erdogan is very active in order to find a solution to this long-standing issue, a very pressing issue. And considering the standing of President Erdogan in the region, in the world, and in the Islamic world, we truly hope that he would make a significant contribution. As for us, we're prepared to do everything in our power in order to solve this situation. By that, I mean our relations that we've built with the State of Israel throughout the past decades. Mr. Oskan, do you have a second question? Oh, well, you have the chance.
For your answer. Sorry. Also, another question would be regarding the Turkey and Russia relations. You've been in negotiations over the course of last 10 years, and one of the mega projects that Turkey and Russia have achieved together was the building of the nuclear power plant in Akkuyu. So for the future, now, is there any development on Russian side regarding the production or the construction project of the gas center that was being discussed in the recent years. Is there any news from the Russian side about that? Or are there any other future project that is being discussed between the two countries? Thank you.
As for Akuyu, everything is going according to the plan. It's all going according to the timeline. We're seeing the deadlines executed. A lot of people are working, and the construction, the workers are being engaged from Turkey, because there is a lot of construction work being done. Our specialists are working in Turkey. We're thankful to the Turkish government for the conditions that were provided for this work. The first unit is being finalized. However, it's all going according to the plan on all units. As for hydrocarbons, and I can repeat, actually, incidentally, we're not just building the station, the power plant, we're also building talent. We're prepared to take over the spent fuel. We're creating the whole system. It's a new sphere of economy and energy of Turkey, and President Erdogan has made a strategic choice, and I think it's quite a right one. It helps get rid of the hydrocarbon dependency as well. We have a reliable partnership. We're doing our work. As for the gas hub, the gas center, yes, we're working on it. We're thinking about it with Gazprom, with Botash, and with other partners. But I'll try to explain. It's not just a gas storage, gas holder. It's a platform. It's an operator to trade in gas for Europe, primarily. But I wanted to point the following thing out. We've seen, well, we're guarding Blue Stream that leads to Turkey through the Black Sea, and that provides Turkey with gas, as well as Turk Stream that provides gas to Europe as well. But we have to guard both of these pipelines that go down the bottom of the Black Sea, because the Ukrainian armed forces are making attempts to strike them and to destroy them. At least the ships that are guarding them are being constantly attacked. And quite recently, the latest thing that happened, I think 7 or 8 days ago, Ukrainian drones made an attempt to attack at a gas pumping station situated on the shore of the Black Sea that is pumping gas to Turkey. Incidentally, we'd like to point it out to you. Turkey has some cooperation with Ukraine. At the same time, Ukraine is trying to strike the gas pipelines providing gas to Turkey. This is not a joke, not an exaggeration. 2 drones were jammed by the Russian electronic warfare troops, and they were trying to strike the gas pumping station on the Black Shore. I'm not inventing something here. That's what happened. Please inform our friend, President Erdogan, that what's happening in reality. And the ships that are guarding this gas transportation system that is at the bottom of the Black Sea are constantly attacked by the drones, by the water drones that are procured by the European countries to Ukraine, incidentally. And they're attacking our boats that are guarding these 2 pipeline systems. I think we need to be more vocal about it and to be more clear. But as for propaganda that our Spanish friend complains so much about, we're not always succeeding in that. But that's what's really happening all the time. But bilateral relations are developing rather successfully, and our trade is growing. However, I'm taking a look at what's happening. And it seems to me that the economic part of the government of Turkey recently have been focusing on receiving investments and loans, receiving grants. From the Western financial institutions. Possibly it's all right. Maybe all right. But if it will have limitations on trade and economic ties with Russia, then I think that the loss for the Turkish economy will be greater than the gain, and I think there is such a possibility. But it's a sensitive matter. Maybe it requires a separate discussion. We're just simply looking at the figures, at the macroeconomic indicators. They require special attention from the Turkish government right now, but I don't want to go into detail on that, though I know them very well. I'm very well read on that. I know what's happening there. Thank you very much, Mr. Osan. President Putin, you've traveled for 3 days to Uzbekistan, and you've mentioned that this visit was a very fruitful one, a very successful one. And now you have a guest from Tashkent who came here, Mr. Kuchimov, Director General of the National News Agency, Uzbekistan. Mr. Kuchimov, you have the floor. Thank you. Mr. Putin, during the recent negotiations in Tashkent, you, with Mr. Mirzoyev, you have exchanged opinions on the relevant international issues. For us in Uzbekistan, it's very important that we have peace and stability in the neighboring country of Afghanistan. Unfortunately, we see that the matters of Ukraine have completely substituted Afghanistan, though it's not less pressing. Though there is an objective need to build interaction with the new authorities of Afghanistan and to help solve the social and economic issues of the long-suffering Afghan nation. Moreover, we can see the strive of the new authorities, that is Taliban, to establish peace in their country and to constructively cooperate with all states. Therefore, here comes my question. How important it is for the Russian Federation to support ties with Afghanistan? Is the Afghanistan playing an important role in Russian politics and policy? And what's your take on the situation in that country? First, I'd like to confirm that my visit to Uzbekistan was indeed very thoroughly prepared and very successful and effective, yielded great results. And I don't think that it has been paralleled yet. Upon the initiative of President Mirziyoyev, we did not only travel to Uzbekistan upon the invitation of the president with a great governmental delegation, but we were also simultaneously holding a meeting of the heads of regions. It just happened so that half of the Russian government traveled out to Tashkent, and a tremendous number of heads of regions of the Russian Federation as well. Some leaders of the Russian regions were happy to talk to the new members of the government of the Russian Federation in Tashkent as well. They were working together in wonderful lockstep, and it was quite a surprise for me as well. We were discussing the matters of the issue of Ukraine, and naturally President Mirziyoyev is very actively promoting a peaceful settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. He spoke multiple times about the concerns of Uzbekistan due to what's happening in Ukraine. We're thankful to the president for the fact that the Uzbekistan policy is very neutral in its nature, very well balanced. As for Afghanistan, we also spoke about that. The issue that Uzbekistan is facing is the matter of finding an entry to the global ocean, to the world ocean, to the sea. So it's a matter of logistics through the territory of Afghanistan as well. Pipeline transportation, railroad transportation, car transportation, providing energy and electric power and so on. Naturally, for Uzbekistan and for us, it's very important that there is stability in Afghanistan. We have always believed that we need to follow the reality. Taliban control the power, are in power in Afghanistan, and naturally we need to strive to achieve all agreements at the level of the United Nations to be implemented, so there will be inclusive power, including all ethnic groups of Afghanistan. It's a very delicate matter, a very important one, but we need to build relations with the government of Taliban. In general, we have contacts, and I know that Uzbekistan is doing it as well. Well, we have to move forward. We need to build relations with a neighboring country, especially since Uzbekistan has a very lengthy border with that country. And you need to ensure security as well, and to develop logistics. We have agreed that we'll work on that together and we'll study the opportunities there. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Kuchimov. And our Far Eastern neighbor, Executive Director of Kyoto News Agency, Toshimitsu Sawai. Mr. Sawai is a very seasoned international journalist with great experience. Throughout his time, he worked as a correspondent in different parts of the world, for example, in Kenya, Thailand, Pakistan, the US. Mr. Sawai, please, you have the floor. Thank you so much, Mr. President, that you have given me a valuable opportunity to ask you a question. Right now, in the Far Eastern region, there are many matters that are of concern for Japan. First and foremost, that's the territorial dispute with Russia. Second, military cooperation between Russia and North Korea. That is being strengthened right now, these two issues that we're facing in Japan. As for territorial disputes and the territorial issues, my question is the following. In Khabarovsk this year, you said that you will absolutely travel to these 4 disputed Kuril islands. Do you have any specific plans? A timeline for that visit? What do you think? The situation right now is that the negotiations are put on hold. And if you visit these territories, then our bilateral relations will be harmed yet again. If you could please share what are your plans in that regard. As for Russian-Japanese talks and their re-establishment during the time of the special military operation in Ukraine, these negotiations were discontinued. And since then, the descendants of the former citizens of those islands cannot go back to visit the graves of their forefathers. Our relations with Japan were developing in a rather sustained manner. Of course, there were many issues, especially the ones that regarded the key issue in our relations, that is the peace treaty. Understandably, this peace treaty could not have been achieved without solving the issues that had to do with the Kuril Island. We were fully aware of that back in the 50s, and you and I know it very well, that the Soviet government made a decision, I think it was done in 1956, a declaration was signed that the Soviet Union is prepared to transfer 2 out of these isles, out of the chain of islands. But the basis for that wasn't mentioned, the reasoning for that, and the sovereignty was also not mentioned, and some other conditions, possibly the payments, were not mentioned. However, the very idea of a transfer was stipulated in that declaration. Moreover, it was ratified by the Supreme Council of the USSR. For some reason, the Japanese side refused to implement these agreements. Hence, the Soviet Union also de-ratified that. Per request of the Japanese side, we went back to the review of these matters. It was a complex dialogue, but still it took place. Now you mentioned several issues. Visiting the Isles. The Russian Federation believes that this is a part of the sovereign territory of Russia. Therefore, I don't see why I should shy away from visiting one of the territories of the Russian Federation.